If you love binge watching and you hate being interrupted by ads, you need Pi. It's a free browser extension that blocks ads on your favorite.
On the night of October 29th, 2012, Hoboken, New Jersey's Path subway station was on the brink of catastrophe. Behind me, this elevator is holding back millions of gallons of water from New York City's vital arteries. However, this is far from a unique scene. Just over in Lower Manhattan, the Hudson and East Rivers converge into New York City's financial district. The hub of the world's economy was filling with water. Despite landfalling as an extratropical cyclone with only Category 1 strength, Sandy would go down as one of the most impactful storms in American history. Sandy's story starts over a week earlier, 1,600 miles away. On October 20th, a region of low pressure became an area of interest for the National Hurricane Center. Invest 99L was parked over the Caribbean Sea and slowly organizing. By the morning of the 22nd, now Tropical Depression 18 warranted a visit from the U.S. Air Force Reserve 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, better known as the Hurricane Hunters. Their recon flight on the night of the 22nd revealed sustained winds of 35 knots in the outer bands of TD18. Thus, Tropical Storm Sandy was born. The NHC grew increasingly concerned. This storm was in the perfect region for development for this time of year, sitting stationary and taking full advantage of the warm Caribbean. Sandy would continue to organize over the next 36 hours before starting a northeasterly course towards eastern Jamaica and Cuba. At this time, the NHC was not confident in calling for a U.S. landfall just yet. However, their counterparts at the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts made the bold prediction for a direct American East Coast landfall. Midday on the 24th, Sandy would make the first of several landfalls just east of Kingston, Jamaica as a Category 1 hurricane. The eastern half of the island would experience the brunt of the storm as roofs blew off of buildings and falling trees would wreak havoc on power lines. Despite moving over the island nation's mountainous terrain, Sandy continued to strengthen. To the east, the nation of Haiti, while removed from the heart of the storm, would feel the devastating impacts from the hurricane. Still reeling from the 2010 earthquake, the heavy rains flooded most of the southern parts of the country. Entire refugee camps would be inundated with rainwater, resulting in the further displacement of 200,000 people and the lives of 75 lost to the storm. Sandy would reach Category 3 status upon its landfall in Santiago de Cuba on the start of the 25th. With 115-mile-per-hour sustained winds, over 15,000 homes were destroyed, while a further 43,000 lost their roofs. The lives of 11 were lost. It would be Cuba's deadliest hurricane since Dennis in 2005. Crossing Cuba would prove to be difficult for the hurricane, weakening to a Category 2 on the far side. Continuing its journey northward, Sandy would undergo a metamorphosis. Wind shear and dry air would batter the storm. Nevertheless, the once relatively small hurricane turned into a massive tropical system. While it would still possess a warm core, its appearance looked more like a frontal low over land rather than a hurricane. This odd hybrid state would earn Sandy the distinction of superstorm. Despite the weakening trend over the Bahamas that brought Sandy back down to tropical storm strength, the NHC grew increasingly concerned for the Atlantic coast of the United States. On the 27th of October, a recon flight yielded data that supported the re-strengthening of Sandy back to hurricane status. The Gulf Stream was keeping Sandy fueled and warm-cored, increasing convection in the center. Adjacent to the storm, an upper low in the eastern US and an upper high over Atlantic Canada would be the steering influences at play. The NHC finally confirms an East Coast landfalling hurricane, a full 4 days after the European Forecast Center's prediction.
This is Buick, now. Buick, exceptional by design.
Get 0.9% APR on these Buick models. Plus, current eligible non-GM owners get up to $3,000 allowance on Encore GX.
Preparations in the United States began swiftly on the morning of the 28th. States of emergency were enacted in places all along the mid-Atlantic and northeastern coasts. The Jersey Shore was squarely in the cone of uncertainty, meaning the most damaging north side of the storm would be squarely aimed at New York City Metro. The city responded by shutting down services and asking residents to shelter in place. Evacuation of New Jersey's barrier islands were mandated as the surge was expected to be unlike anything seen prior. Meanwhile, Sandy would start to complete its metamorphosis. By the morning of the 29th, Sandy peaked out once again at Category 2 strength with gale force winds covering an astonishing 1,200-mile span, making this the widest Atlantic storm in history. Sandy would turn extratropical as it further interacted with the low to the west, losing its warm core. Even so, pressure continued to drop within Sandy, and it would keep making its westward turn towards New Jersey. As day progressed on the 29th, New Yorkers were initially confused. After a day of strong wording from officials of the dangers, it was no more than a blustery and wet day in the city. However, the looming threat was silently approaching. As Sandy drew closer and closer to the coastline, the massive area of low pressure would allow for water to continue to bottleneck in New York's waterways. To add to the dire situation, a full moon high tide was perfectly timed with landfall. Along the waterways of Greater New York, piers would be the first to submerge. Within Manhattan, where critical utilities and other infrastructures are below ground, surge would quickly find its way into subway tubes, electrical routings, and other passageways. Parts of the city would begin to go dark as the water continued its march inland. 100 miles south of Manhattan, Sandy would make landfall just north of Atlantic City, New Jersey. At 945 millibars, Sandy blew the previous low-pressure records out of the water for much of the region. Though only possessing sustained winds of 80 miles per hour, Sandy's surge would prove to be widespread and devastating. The barrier islands would be swallowed by the oceans on either side, with some of them completely disappearing under the waves. Iconic Jersey Shore landmarks were claimed by the rising ocean. Back in Greater New York, entire neighborhoods were being overtaken by seawater. Some of the hardest hit areas of surge included Red Hook, Coney Island, Rockaway, and a large swath of eastern Staten Island. Over in Breezy Point, Queens, ocean water would meet electrical lines, sparking a fire. Hurricane-force winds would supercharge the flames into a conflagration. Firefighters could only watch as surge dominated the streets. Over 100 homes would go up in flames. In Manhattan, surge made it in location 6 blocks inland, peaking out at nearly 14 feet. Battery Tunnel, a vital main passage between Brooklyn and Lower Manhattan, completely filled with water. Every subway line south of 34th Street was knocked out of commission. Across the Hudson in New Jersey, cities like Hoboken, Jersey City, and Bayonne were all completely inundated, and the National Guard had to be deployed to help tens of thousands of stranded residents. While the New York Metro was taking its beating, it seemed as though that the entire East Coast was feeling some sort of effect from Sandy. The Delmarva Peninsula would see catastrophic amounts of rainfall, with Bellevue, Maryland recording a whopping 13 inches of rain. Even further inland, large quantities of snow fell across the higher elevations of Appalachia. Sandy would ultimately meet its demise traveling further inland as its remnants would be absorbed by another low-pressure system over Canada in the following days. Nonetheless, Sandy had left a permanent mark on the eastern United States. 8.5 million power customers were without electricity across 21 states, making it the largest power outage in American history. Many areas of Greater New York City were completely devastated, with some of the city's services needing months to years to be repaired. Hoboken's PATH station would not see regular service until March of 2013. Additionally, South Ferry and Whitehall Street Station would be closed until 2017.
Want to make Mom's year and not just her day? Then check out these must-have gifts for Mother's Day. Nothing says, I'm a cool mom, quite like the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. Meta AI tools help me get all sorts of information, set reminders, and take photos. An organized mom is a happy mom. And nothing keeps me more organized and happy than the Skylight 15-inch touchscreen smart calendar. It puts everyone's calendars from every device in one spot. And it tracks chore charts and dinner planning. I am big into birding. Hello, Mama Bird here. The Bird Feast Smart Bird Feeder takes birding to a whole new level. Not only do I feed the birds, I watch them eat. It has a high-def camera so I can watch, record, and share each and every nibble from my phone or computer. And check these out, the PowerBeats Pro 2 wireless earbuds. They help me focus with active noise canceling, but also let me tune in when I have to, with transparency mode. Day made, year made. Am I right?
Dream, 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 dream. Dream, dream, dream when I want you. In my arms when I want you. And all your charms whenever I want you. All I have to do is dream, 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 dream.
While Greater New York certainly had their damages, the Jersey Shore was arguably the most heavily impacted region. Most properties on the barrier islands had some level of surge damage, and entire boardwalks had been swept into the Atlantic. In Maniloking, the surge was so strong that it cut an inlet straight through the barrier island. When all totaled, the United States suffered $65 billion in damages, making Sandy the second costliest hurricane in U.S. history at the time, only behind Katrina. Most tragically, 158 Americans perished in Sandy. Across all affected nations, 254 people were killed, and damages totaled to $93.6 billion when adjusted for inflation. Among the discourse in the aftermath, people quickly began to scrutinize the National Hurricane Center, citing how the European forecasting counterparts utilized their higher resolution models to have a correct prediction 4 days earlier. In response, the National Weather Service implemented hardware and software upgrades in the following hurricane season to yield earlier and more accurate forecasts. Sandy was unique, evolving from a Category 3 compact hurricane in the Caribbean into an extratropical superstorm that was 1,200 miles wide. The Category 1 strength label at landfall is incredibly deceiving, as Sandy is quite unlike anything we have seen in recent weather history. A storm so wide with such expansive low pressure, timed perfectly with a full moon high tide, Sandy was simply something that was a perfect recipe for disaster to make it the Northeast storm of the century.
Getting barrels is pretty much like, that is all I pursue.
For me, I'm drawn to the challenge that surfing brings to me.
Just realized how good that feeling was, and I was like, I just want to keep doing that. Pursue your thrill. Smith Optics.
Monday, August 29th, 2005. The most infamous hurricane in American history makes landfall near the Louisiana-Mississippi border. Hurricane Katrina batters the coastal communities with 125-mile-per-hour winds and a 30-foot storm surge. In the sub-sea level city of New Orleans, the miles of coastal protection is taking a beating. Levees constructed by the many waterways around the community strain to hold back the extra billions of gallons of water that Katrina has driven in from the Gulf of Mexico. Early that Monday morning, the city's worst fears were realized as one of the levees bordering the 17th Street Canal, the main levee protecting the Lakeview neighborhood of New Orleans, catastrophically failed. One by one, in a cruel domino effect, levees protecting the city failed, unleashing a deluge of water into the city and surrounding parishes. What would ensue would become one of the worst natural disasters in United States history. With over 1,800 people dead and $125 billion of damage, uncovering what exactly happened with the flood protection system of New Orleans was a top priority. What was uncovered would shock the nation. Negligence, underestimation, and bureaucracy led to an engineering disaster that would make Hurricane Katrina a storm for the ages. To answer how it all went wrong, we need to understand a couple of things. What levees are, New Orleans' geography, New Orleans' flood control systems, and Hurricane Katrina. First, let's dive into levees. Levees are a pretty simplistic flood control structure. They are large man-made earthen or concrete embankments that separate waterways from settled land. While the structure itself is pretty simple, the hydrology that levees can influence is rather complex. Levees must resist hydrostatic and hydrodynamic forces through the shear force in the soil they're built upon. Levees are extremely wide at their base for two reasons. Firstly is that hydrostatic pressure increases with depth as water on the top weighs on the water below. If you've ever swam deep into a pool or lake, you felt hydrostatic pressure increase the deeper you went. The second reason is that it increases the area that the shear stress can be dissipated through, increasing the strength of the levee against hydrostatic and hydrodynamic forces. Now that we understand levees, let's dive into New Orleans' geography. New Orleans is in a very precarious location when it comes to the water that surrounds it. When it was first settled by the French in the early 18th century, they built it upon the higher banks of the Mississippi River. Most of the developments utilized these higher banks up until the Flood Act of 1965, which funded flood control projects all along Lake Pontchartrain. This meant that New Orleans could expand beyond the banks that they'd been confined to, as the new flood control infrastructure would allow for developments in what was once wetlands, part of Lake Pontchartrain's floodplain. Fast forward to 2005, where there are now several key waterways that run through New Orleans and the neighboring parishes. There's the 17th Street Canal, London Avenue Canal, Industrial Canal, Intracoastal Waterway, and of course the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain. So with all this water surrounding the city, what measures were put in place to prevent coastal flooding events? New Orleans' flood control system in 2005 was primarily consisting of levees that were designed by the Army Corps of Engineers. As new levees were constructed, there were just as many old levees that were being modified. Many needed to have supplemental walls built into them, as the higher you go with a traditional levee, the wider the base needs to be. With urban developments built right next to the levee, the bases could not be widened, so flood walls were integrated into many of the pre-existing levees with an eye wall configuration. In addition to these levees, there are almost 100 pumping stations positioned strategically throughout the city. Even with all of these measures in place, the right storm at the right time could bring the city to its knees. Tropical Depression 12 formed over the Bahamas on the late afternoon of Tuesday, August 23, 2005. In 24 hours, the National Hurricane Center upgraded the Tropical Depression, making it the 11th named storm of the season, Tropical Storm Katrina. Upon reaching the southeastern Florida coast on Thursday, August 25th, Katrina became a Category 1 hurricane. This first landfall was largely uneventful, slightly weakening the storm. However, Katrina was about to enter the Gulf of Mexico. The unseasonably warm currents in the Gulf turbocharged the storm over the coming days. From Saturday night and into Sunday morning, Katrina underwent a rapid intensification, going from a Category 3 to Category 5 storm in only 9 hours. The National Hurricane Center forecasted the second landfall to most likely be southeastern Louisiana. Preparations were already underway in the Bayou State as a federal emergency was declared and residents boarded up and evacuated. For the many that couldn't evacuate, the Superdome in downtown New Orleans was converted into a shelter, and even then, many didn't leave their homes. The city held its breath on the evening of Sunday, August 28th. Katrina was on New Orleans' doorstep. Even before the hurricane would make landfall, things started to unfold drastically in the city of New Orleans. Storm surge had already begun to overwhelm the areas of the Mississippi River Delta, many of which did not have any flood protection. In the city, many of the levees began to bear the loads of extreme amounts of water being bottlenecked into the waterways surrounding the city. At 5 a.m. on the 29th, the cracks in the flood protection system were beginning to show. The eastern levee of the Industrial Canal suffered its first breach, allowing water to start flowing into the lower 9th Ward. At 6 a.m. on the morning of August 29th, Katrina made landfall as a Category 3 hurricane with winds of 125 miles per hour. As the eyewall traversed the communities in the Mississippi River Delta, it brought a 30-foot storm surge to the Mississippi coast. In Louisiana, the storm surge was not as high, at worst around 16 feet. Even with the lower storm surge near New Orleans, a critical flaw was about to be exposed in the design of the levees. Around 6:30 a.m., the city's worst fears were coming to fruition. The eastern levee of the 17th Street Canal was the first to catastrophically fail. Water rushed into the below sea level Lakeview neighborhood of the city. 30 minutes later, the eastern levee of the London Avenue Canal was breached, followed shortly thereafter by the western levee. Up throughout the city on Monday morning, water was rising at least a foot every 10 minutes if you were lucky. The unlucky ones closest to the levee failures didn't stand a chance as the flood water came into the neighborhoods like a wall, overshooting the thousands of single-story homes. The pump stations around the city weren't capable of handling an event of this magnitude, many of which flooded instantly upon levee failures, rendering them useless. Even once Katrina had passed, the gaping holes left in the levees allowed water to continue to pour in for days on end. How could an entire city's flood protection system fail so catastrophically? There are 3 parts to this answer, so let's dive into the engineering behind New Orleans' levees. The levees in New Orleans were built from earthen material on top of marsh, followed by clay underneath. Levees on soft materials like these can slide under intense hydrostatic and hydrodynamic forces. This is a common issue in levee design, so to make sure that the levees don't slide, the force opposing the hydro forces must be greater. The critical detail to achieve this is to measure the soil strength in the area. Before building the levees, soil samples were taken from where the levees were to be constructed. After testing all of the samples in a lab, shear strength from the samples was plotted onto a graph comparing the strength to the depth of the sample. The engineers would use this plot to influence their design decisions. A shocking discovery found that engineers designing the levees completely misinterpreted the graph, using the near opposite shear profile needed for the levees to hold back the water. To compound this already fatal error, the engineers used a rather low factor of safety. A factor of safety is a measure of how much stronger a design is than what it's rated for. For example, if an elevator is rated for 1,000 pounds and has a factor of safety of 2, then the elevator can actually hold 2,000 pounds before failing. The engineers that designed the New Orleans levee system used a factor of safety of 1.3, which is on the very low end of acceptable engineering practices for a structure this vital for people's safety. Finally, there were other missed considerations with levee design. At the 17th Street Canal, erosion on the waterway side of the levee led to a water-filled gap, which reduced the effective area of shear strength of the soil, compromising the levee even further. At the London Avenue Canal levee, the material beneath the marsh was sand rather than clay. As the water level rose in the canal, the extreme hydrostatic pressure forced enough water into the permeable sand. A well-constructed levee should have had enough weight to overcome the uplift from water pressure. Unfortunately, the design relied too much on the marsh layer of the levee it was built upon, causing water to seep into the other side of the levee. Once this became the path of least resistance, erosion whittled away the levee from underneath, reducing it to nothing. At the Industrial Canal levee, as water began overtopping the levee, water crashed down the eye wall, causing erosion on the dry side of the levee. The material resisting the hydro forces were whittled away, leading to another complete levee failure. Looking beyond the flood protection measures, most of the residential areas in New Orleans hold an inherent risk for flooding. The American Society of Civil Engineers report on the infrastructure failures in Katrina called for the evaluation of even letting people live in the extremely flood-prone areas of the city. Katrina was the worst-case scenario for the city, but yet, today in 2022, the neighborhoods of the city that saw the worst flooding have been inhabited once again. Many what-ifs exist in the wake of Katrina. What if the levees were built correctly? What if the pumping stations didn't fail? What if more was done to evacuate residents of the city? What Katrina did do,
Found a lost dog? Help them find their home in 4 steps. Walk the pet around the neighborhood. Post photos on social media.
Mid-August 2005. People across the Gulf Coast of the United States were enjoying the end of the summer holiday. Schools would be coming back in session across portions of the country come early September, and tourists flooded the streets, attracted to the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Locals had little to worry about, living day to day as usual. Little did those tourists and the locals know that come the beginning of September, everything would change, with scars etched into the coasts of Mississippi and Louisiana that last to this day. In late August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina brought its wrath to the Florida Peninsula and to the Gulf coasts of Mississippi and Louisiana, with Louisiana, specifically New Orleans, suffering the worst of the storm. Hurricane Katrina's toll on the coasts of Mississippi and Louisiana was beyond comprehension, with nothing but pure devastation observed in Mississippi, but New Orleans, to put it lightly, saw the absolute worst of the damage. The levee system in New Orleans failed, leading to 80% of the city being submerged underwater. The government response to Katrina after the fact is considered to be the worst government response to a natural disaster in U.S. history. Hurricane Katrina has garnered a reputation for being the most infamous hurricane in U.S. history, and it's obvious as to why. I mean, it's far and away the most expensive hurricane in U.S. history, tied with Hurricane Harvey of 2017. Everybody knows about Hurricane Katrina and are already aware of what I just told you. But today, I want to look deeper into Hurricane Katrina, looking deeper into how the meteorological development of Hurricane Katrina occurred and how the response failed. So today, I will be taking a deep dive into Hurricane Katrina, going over the state of the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season thus far, the origins, the forecast, the preparations taken, the storm's impacts on the areas it traveled across, the aftermath and a failed response to Hurricane Katrina from the government, and the legacy that the storm has. Welcome to Nature's Fury. The 2005 Atlantic hurricane season was already extremely active by the time Katrina formed. To be fair, the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season would end up going down as the most active year for tropical cyclones in the northern Atlantic until 2020, at least in terms of named storms. Before Katrina formed, there were 10 named storms plus 1 unnamed depression that formed in the Atlantic basin, 2 of those being major hurricanes. The first major hurricane of the season was Hurricane Dennis, a high-end Category 4 hurricane that slammed into Cuba and the Gulf Coast of the United States. While Dennis did weaken before its landfall in the United States, Hurricane Dennis's impacts to Cuba and the United States led the storm to be retired. The second major storm was Hurricane Emily, the earliest Category 5 hurricane during the calendar year in the Atlantic Basin, peaking in the Caribbean Sea before making landfall on the Yucatan Peninsula as a Category 4 hurricane. The hurricane emerged off the coast of Mexico and made a second landfall as a Category 3 hurricane near San Fernando, Mexico. To this day, Hurricane Emily remains one of very few Category 5 hurricanes to not have its name retired. From then on, the Atlantic Ocean continued to churn out tropical cyclones, but none were major. But of course, coming into mid to late August, another tropical system would begin to organize off the coast of Florida, and would be given a name that would go down in infamy. But real quick, only a small portion of the people who like these weather documentaries are subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content I create, consider subscribing. It helps support what I do and tells me I'm doing something right. Also, I have a Discord server that I frequently talk in, link to that is in the description. Anyways, back to Hurricane Katrina. Katrina's origins as a tropical system were more complex than most tropical cyclones that form in the northern Atlantic.
Style and substance. In the GMC Sierra. Or get 0.9% APR on these Sierra models. Or get over $5,300 total value.
Not everyone's life runs in straight lines. At Sophia, we get that. Our flexible, affordable, self-paced college-level courses help thousands of people just like you complete their degrees for only $99 a month.
Katrina's formation was the result of the interactions of a tropical wave, the mid-level remnants of Tropical Depression 10, and an upper-level trough. On August 11th, a tropical wave exited the coast of Africa and moved through the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean over the next few days. While the wave was crossing across the MDR, on August 14th, a strong upper-level trough located across the western Atlantic and the Bahamas created strong westerly shear across Tropical Depression 10, causing it to dissipate. The low-level circulation, however, persisted, moving westward while gradually weakening before dissipating near Cuba on August 21st. The mid-level circulation that originated from Tropical Depression 10 lagged behind the low-level circulation. Eventually, the mid-level circulation merged with the tropical wave that left the coast of Africa. The wave proceeded to produce a large area of showers and thunderstorms north of Puerto Rico, moving towards the northwest before consolidating east of the Turks and Caicos Islands. At the same time, the upper-level trough began to weaken as it moved westward into Florida, allowing for the tropical wave to develop due to the lack of wind shear associated with the trough. By 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on August 23rd, the system was designated as Tropical Depression 12. During the overnight hours, the depression became better organized, and at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on August 24th, the depression was upgraded to a tropical storm and given the name Katrina. As Katrina developed off the coast of Florida, Katrina came under the influence of a strengthening mid to upper level ridge over the northern Gulf of Mexico and southern United States. This ridge would be responsible for turning Katrina westward, and that was represented well in the forecasts. The National Hurricane Center predicted that Katrina would move over the southern Florida peninsula at a slow pace, projected to make landfall as a Category 1 hurricane and cross over into the Gulf of Mexico. As to what was expected once it went into the Gulf of Mexico, that was uncertain. Original forecasts called for a landfall ranging from the western coast of the Florida peninsula all the way into portions of Alabama. Long-term forecasts were uncertain, but in the short term, the threat was for Florida. As Katrina turned westward, tropical storm watches and warnings and hurricane warnings were issued for the Florida coastline. In advance of the storm's landfall, Florida Governor Jeb Bush issued a state of emergency on August 24th, with Florida's Emergency Operations Center being activated in Tallahassee. Schools and businesses began closing in the Miami metro area. Cruise ships altered their paths due to the seaports in Florida closing, and airports across southern Florida were closed. Residents in Florida began stocking up on supplies, and gas shortages were an expected issue across Florida due to limited supply. Evacuation orders were issued across portions of Florida, and emergency shelters were opened in preparation for Katrina. Preparations were quick due to how close Katrina was to the coast of Florida by the time warnings were issued, and it was only a matter of time before Katrina would land its first punch. While Katrina was turning towards the Florida coastline, the storm was already bringing impacts to portions of the Bahamas. Thankfully, the Bahamas had minimal impacts from Katrina. Before landfall, Katrina strengthened to a Category 1 hurricane, making landfall around 4:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time in southern Florida with winds of 80 miles per hour. The storm had an asymmetrical structure as it came ashore, with the heaviest rain and the strongest winds occurring to the south and east of the center. However, what Katrina is mostly remembered for in Florida was the severe flooding that occurred. Due to the asymmetrical structure of Katrina and the slow movement of the storm, flooding became an issue in far southern Florida. In extreme southern Florida, rainfall totals were in excess of 5 inches, with some areas seeing over 10 inches of rainfall. The maximum rainfall observed in Florida was in Perrine, Florida, with a total of 16.43 inches of rainfall falling due to Katrina in the city. A total of 14 deaths occurred in Florida. Of those, 6 were directly due to flooding, and the other 8 were indirect deaths. As Katrina moved across the Florida Peninsula and into the Gulf of Mexico, Katrina weakened down to a bare minimum Category 1 hurricane with winds of 75 miles per hour. The storm continued to become more organized, gradually strengthening after moving over the Florida Keys. Its strengthening was limited, however, due to Katrina undergoing an eyewall replacement cycle. As Katrina continued moving towards the west-southwest, the National Hurricane Center realized that Katrina was not going to aim for the Florida Panhandle. What they began to suspect was a landfall a bit further to the west than that, somewhere along the Louisiana and Alabama Gulf Coasts, putting the city of New Orleans directly in its path.
Looking to elevate your style with elegance and allure? Discover Evo Beauty Online Store, your destination for exquisite jewelry and premium cosmetics. From timeless diamond pieces to vibrant makeup essentials, we have everything to express your unique beauty. Enjoy secure shipping and exceptional support with every purchase. Indulge in luxury and redefine your beauty. Find the link in the description and visit the store. Evo Beauty. Evo Beauty, where elegance meets excellence. Shop now.
Driven to unite and build and imagine and inspire, Cardinals are leading the charge to help a better world take flight here and beyond.
Shortly after the forecast was adjusted, Katrina would complete its eyewall replacement cycle and would explode in intensity, rapidly intensifying from a Category 3 hurricane to a 175-mile-per-hour Category 5 hurricane, and in its crosshairs was New Orleans, Louisiana. Regardless of Katrina's strength at landfall, governments at all levels knew evacuations had to begin with the utmost urgency, and in some cases should have already been underway. However, it was abundantly clear in the days that followed that there was a major discrepancy between what officials said and what they actually did in preparation for the disaster which was approaching fast. Frankly, to call it a dumpster fire would be giving officials too much credit for their work, which we will see very shortly. The response to Hurricane Katrina, both in preparations and during the aftermath, is often referred to as the worst government response to a natural disaster in US history. That is an understatement, but it's during this segment where I want to go more in depth with what went wrong during preparations, what went right, and the glaring problem that was staring New Orleans right in the face, the levee system. Let's begin with a timeline of events. After Katrina strengthened to a Category 3 hurricane, President George W. Bush declared a state of emergency in Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi ahead of Katrina. According to the congressional report from the bipartisan committee established to investigate the government's response to Hurricane Katrina, preparations in Mississippi went rather well, at least in comparison to what occurred in Louisiana. Months leading up to the storm, county and state officials were prepared and underwent disaster response training. Ahead of Katrina, Mississippi established command structures by way of emergency proclamations, activated emergency operations centers, issued mandatory evacuation orders, opened emergency shelters, and mobilized the National Guard. Evacuations were the top priority, with the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency prioritizing evacuating the coastline before opening shelters, which they eventually did. Mississippi began monitoring Katrina as early as August 23rd, and emergency declarations and troops were deployed on August 26th. Alabama's response for Katrina was also, comparatively speaking, relatively smooth. Of course, after being battered with Hurricane Ivan the year previously, Alabama Emergency Management finalized preparations 4 days before landfall, issuing states of emergencies for the coastal counties. Basically, what happened in Mississippi in advance of Katrina also applied to Alabama, with Alabama also learning from their mistakes in communications because of Hurricanes Ivan and Dennis. Louisiana, being in the direct path of the storm, began commencing with their evacuation plan, with the Department of Transportation and the Louisiana State Police implementing contraflow, making all highway lanes outbound to maximize traffic flow, with the contraflow directing those evacuating into Texas and Mississippi. On the 27th, the National Guard began to be deployed across southeastern Louisiana, and up to 1.2 million Louisiana residents followed the evacuation orders. With Hurricane Katrina expected to make landfall as a Category 4 or 5 hurricane, many who could evacuate ahead of the storm did so. Storm surge was a prominent issue, with storm surge expected to be over 20 feet, which would overtop the levees and flood New Orleans. The levee system collapsing was not a major concern at the time. Very few truly expected the complete collapse of the levee system. Although, the warning signs of what was about to occur was in full display, but I'll get to that later. That all being said, thousands of residents, specifically in New Orleans, stayed in their homes. But why did many people remain where they were?
Mother Nature absolutely beats us down and teaches us lessons. If it wasn't for that, we'd probably get bored of it. And I think that is kind of pursuing my thrill, like feeds and takes me on the roller coaster of emotions that I want to go on. Pursue your thrill. Smith Optics.
Whether you're a professional or simply take pride in tackling your own outdoor projects, Harbor Freight offers gas, corded, and cordless power tools to meet your every need at prices that can't be beat. Harbor Freight, your outdoor power destination.
There's a multitude of reasons, but let's go over the less significant reasons first and go from there. The first issue was the type of evacuation orders that were issued initially. Parishes in Louisiana began declaring evacuation orders as early as August 27th at 9 a.m., specifically beginning with the southernmost parishes, then moving northward to prevent traffic bottlenecks. However, the type of evacuation orders initially issued were not mandatory, but rather recommendatory. Eventually, the evacuation orders were upgraded to mandatory, but this caused some issues with messaging. The second issue was that Governor Blanco did not issue a state of emergency, but rather relied on the federal state of emergency declaration. The decision to not issue a local state of emergency meant that there was conflicting messaging regarding what to do ahead of Katrina and afterwards. However, the biggest issues with the preparations in Louisiana came out of New Orleans. In New Orleans, the mandatory evacuation order was issued extremely late, with Mayor Ray Nagin issuing a mandatory evacuation of the city only 20 hours before landfall. Critics argue that he should have issued it earlier, but at least it was declared. The city of New Orleans established several refuges of last resort for citizens, most notably the Superdome. Now, to be clear, 80% of the New Orleans metro area evacuated ahead of Katrina, but the issues with the preparations in Louisiana wasn't related to those who had the ability to evacuate, but rather the inaction done to help those who could not evacuate on their own. While most of New Orleans was able to evacuate, the evacuation plans did not benefit those who had the inability to evacuate on their own, specifically those in poverty, hospitals, and long-term caring facilities. People in those locations have to rely on outside help, whether that be the government, medical companies, or local groups in order to evacuate to a safer location. However, actions that could have been taken to help evacuate those who are most vulnerable to a storm like Katrina were not done. Long-term care facilities attempted to get in contact with buses and ambulances to get patients out, but many of those companies were unable to evacuate the residents. Fuel was in short supply, and many forms of public transportation were shut down before Katrina came ashore. But the most neglected populace of the New Orleans metro was those below the poverty line, specifically in the lower 9th Ward. Within Louisiana's Emergency Operations Plan, Supplement 1C in Part 2, Section 2, Paragraph D, the plan calls for the use of school buses and other public buses to evacuate those who cannot evacuate on their own. While there were buses publicly available to use to help people evacuate outside of the city or to emergency shelters, there was still a major problem. There weren't enough bus drivers. The issue of the lack of bus drivers could have been circumvented if the governor of Louisiana signed an emergency waiver that would declare that any licensed driver could drive a public bus to help aid with evacuation efforts. Governor Blanco did not sign that waiver, meaning that those in poverty, long-term care facilities, and hospitals were left with little to no assistance from the local governments, leaving them to fend for themselves. For those who stayed, they stocked up on supplies if they could, hoping for the best. However, the true worst-case scenario of the levee system breaking down was not a common concern for those in the path who weren't government officials. But the potential for the levee system breaking down almost completely was very real, and the issues surrounding the levee system were not very well known to residents until after the system had failed. In order to understand how catastrophic the failure of the levee system was, we need to understand the abhorrent conditions of the levee system itself during its construction to understand what happened in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina. The New Orleans levee system began construction at least 35 years before Katrina struck, and in order to understand how it failed, we have to understand the mistakes and shortcuts taken during its construction. From there, it will become blatantly obvious why it ended up collapsing during Hurricane Katrina. There's a lot of engineering jargon in the ASCE report on the levee system from 2007, but I will try and simplify it the best I can. It's well known that the levee system was poorly constructed, but I cannot say it enough. The report itself establishes that the state of the levee system was far worse than what's commonly known. The New Orleans levee system, officially known as the New Orleans Hurricane Protection System, is made up of 3 main units: the Lake Pontchartrain, Louisiana, and Vicinity Hurricane Protection Project, the West Bank and Vicinity New Orleans, Louisiana Hurricane Protection Project, and the New Orleans to Venice, Louisiana Hurricane Protection Project. The protection projects consisted of 3 types of levees: earthen levees, which was most of the system, eye walls, and T-walls. You don't really need to know much about how they work entirely, you just need to know that the eye walls and T-walls were the ones that failed the most. In concept, relatively simple and easy to construct, from an engineering standpoint at least. However, as the ASCE report states, a multitude of problems surrounded the levee system's construction and maintenance, and let's take this issue by issue, starting with the funding and issues that come with it. The one in control of the funding of the majority of levee systems across the United States is the United States Army Corps of Engineers, the USACE for short. The USACE is, by all accounts, a bureaucratic agency under the Department of Defense. The USACE's position as a bureaucratic agency means that the budget the agency has changes each year because Congress is in charge of the federal budget every year. It is not consistent, and because bureaucracy, funding for projects done by the USACE has to be split up into multiple smaller projects. This applied to the New Orleans levee system. The system wasn't really a system, but a bunch of separate parts that varied in construction quality and maintenance, built in a piecemeal fashion. What this ultimately meant is that the weak levees that, for all intents and purposes, would fail were placed next to stronger levees which would normally not be susceptible to failure. Because of how the levees varied in size and height in such close proximity to each other, essentially, the strong levees were pointless as they would be overtaken due to floodwaters that overtopped the weaker levees. Not to mention that due to this funding system, portions of the levee system weren't built or even complete by the time Katrina hit. Remember, anything is only as strong as its weakest part. Just from the funding issue alone and the piecemeal structure, it would surprise no one how the levee system failed. And yet, it somehow gets worse. When constructing the levee system, many safety protocols that should have been taken in order to maximize safety were ignored. This all begins with the data that was used to construct the system. When building the levee systems, the USACE was given numbers from the National Weather Service of what a standard hurricane that would hit New Orleans would be like. The initial numbers of a high-end hurricane that was used to design the levee systems was 101 to 111 miles per hour. The standard hurricane data came from 1959. The National Weather Service revised their numbers of what the worst-case scenario of a hurricane in New Orleans would be, in order to design the levee system with the worst-case scenario in mind. Despite the new numbers, the USACE did not use those new numbers and designed the system with the old numbers in mind. The levee system was designed with a Category 2 hurricane in mind, not the worst-case scenario. But wait, there's more. The levee system as a whole did not take into account that the city of New Orleans was subsiding at a rate of roughly 1/5 of an inch a year. So instead of the levees being adjusted for that rate, the levees just subsided alongside the city. On top of that, erosion of the levees wasn't taken into account either. No measures were taken to limit or prevent the erosion of the levees, and the mean sea level data that was used incorrectly, leading to levees being 1 to 2 feet below what they should have been, and water gaps that formed behind the eye walls were not taken into account by engineers when constructing the levee system. There also was no single agency in charge of overseeing the levee system, nor was there any serious external review of the levee system to make sure it was maintained properly. So, in summary, the levee system of New Orleans was not much a system, but more so a hodgepodge of several small parts that were poorly glued together and constructed without taking into account very important factors in order to maximize the safety of New Orleans, leading to a levee system which was meant to be a protector of the city, being the equivalent of a ticking time bomb. It was only a matter of time before the levee system's flaws would be exposed greatly in the worst way possible. That storm was Katrina. And if it wasn't Katrina, it very likely would have been something else. So, with the preparations of the levee system covered, it was only a matter of time before Katrina would turn towards the Louisiana coast. And in the process, it would become one of the most intense hurricanes ever recorded in the Gulf of Mexico.
Unlock a new world of efficiency with Asana. Identify blockers to keep work, projects, and goals on track. Try for free today at asana.com.
After Hurricane Katrina completed its eyewall replacement cycle off the coast of the Florida Keys, Hurricane Katrina began to become better organized and more symmetrical, expanding in size to become a massive hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Due to a lack of wind shear and extremely warm sea surface temperatures, Katrina rapidly intensified from a Category 3 hurricane to a Category 5 monster, peaking in intensity and strength south of the Louisiana coast on August 28th. Hurricane Katrina peaked with winds of 175 miles per hour and a minimum central pressure of 902 millibars, one of the lowest pressures ever recorded in the Gulf of Mexico. But from space, Katrina's presentation was the classic hurricane that many think of. An almost perfectly symmetrical hurricane, massive in size, a mesmerizing terror that was about to crash into the coast of the United States. As Katrina turned northward under the influence of the ridge that steered it into Florida, Katrina underwent another eyewall replacement cycle. Due to the eyewall replacement cycle, lower sea surface temperatures, increased wind shear, and dry air being injected near the center of circulation, Katrina began to weaken up until landfall. Its pressure, on the other hand, remained extremely low. Despite the degrading structure, Katrina was a force to be reckoned with. Many went to sleep on August 28th hoping for the best and expecting the worst. But what many expected to be the worst-case scenario was far, far better than what actually happened across the Gulf Coast the next morning. In the early morning hours of the 29th, many across Louisiana were waking up to what could only be described as a cataclysm descending onto their homes. Katrina was coming in during high tide, and due to Katrina's low pressure of 920 millibars, tides were already 3 feet above normal. Storm surge ranged across the Louisiana coast, with many areas seeing storm surge in excess of 10 feet, peaking in 20 feet in Louisiana. Much of the New Orleans area was already seeing storm surge of 10 to 15 feet batter against the levee system. The mean water level rose to over 20 feet across the New Orleans area. The levee systems were struggling even before the eye wall came anywhere close to the city. Shortly after 6 a.m., Hurricane Katrina made landfall to the southeast of New Orleans as a Category 3 hurricane. But during this time, the levee system was already failing. The Industrial Canal East Bank North Eye Wall was the first to fail, with water rushing into the lower 9th Ward around 5 a.m. At 6:30 a.m., a section of the eye wall along the east side of the 17th Street Canal failed. Then sometime between 6 and 7 a.m., the southern portion of the London Avenue Canal levee failed. Then, the northern portion of the canal. Like dominoes toppling one after another, levee after levee failed, with a total of 53 levees in the New Orleans area being breached during Katrina. The levee system collapsed, leading to what could only be described as walls of water rushing into the city. The water submerged houses in as fast as a couple minutes, at rates of nearly a foot a minute. The water in New Orleans would only continue to rise, only stopping when the water in New Orleans became equal to the water level in Lake Pontchartrain. But New Orleans was only one location affected, because the next target for Hurricane Katrina was the Mississippi coastline. After Katrina made landfall in Louisiana, Katrina made its final landfall near the Mississippi-Louisiana state line as a Category 3 hurricane with winds of 120 miles per hour. Mississippi, being in the northeast quadrant, suffered the worst from Katrina, experiencing storm surge of 27 feet, going 6 miles inland, leveling beachfront neighborhoods, wiping houses off of their foundations, with preliminary estimates calculating that 90% of structures within half a mile of the coast was completely destroyed. Hurricane Katrina's landfall in the state of Mississippi was the strongest landfall in the state in terms of pressure since Hurricane Camille, and many residents would soon find out that Katrina was on par, if not worse in some areas of Mississippi, than what they experienced during Camille. Hurricane Katrina beelined nearly due north, weakening as it traveled north into Mississippi, with every county in the state experiencing Katrina's wrath. While Katrina weakened, Katrina brought a noticeable flooding threat to the southeastern United States through the Ohio River Valley and into Canada. Many areas received at least an inch of rain, with localized areas of over 5 inches of rainfall across most of Mississippi, portions of Kentucky, and the Appalachian Mountains. Storm surge was also a threat to the Alabama and Florida coastlines, with storm surge ranging from 14 to 16 feet in Alabama, leveling houses and leading to over 500,000 people losing power in the state of Alabama, one of the largest power outages in the state's history. However, as the storm passed over Louisiana and Mississippi, people struggled to even comprehend the devastation that surrounded them. It would take a while for some, but to all, the result was readily apparent. They were witnesses to what is arguably the worst aftermath from a hurricane in the continental United States in recorded history. Most of this segment is dedicated to the New Orleans area because that's what people remember, but I do want to briefly mention what happened in Mississippi first.
We see you getting after your fitness goals, but what about those money goals? You can count on Credit Karma for a clear view of your finances and your progress, helping you see results so you can keep checking off those financial personal bests and find your way to money. Progress never felt so good. Download the Intuit Credit Karma app and start achieving your money goals today. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on.
The damage in Mississippi was the worst damage observed from a hurricane in the state since Hurricane Camille. Many communities, specifically near Biloxi and Gulfport, Mississippi, were swept from existence, with houses along the coast being slabbed. Most of the damage was visible after the storm passed, with many residents coming back to see nothing but pure destruction. Katrina's storm surge of 27 feet was the largest storm surge ever recorded in the United States since records have been kept. Many areas were inundated, and the storm surge was responsible for the majority of the damage in Mississippi. However, the majority of focus was what was going on in New Orleans, in what is referred to as the worst response to a natural disaster from the United States government, on the local, state, and federal levels. As the clouds began to lighten and the sky began to become clear, those who stayed behind, either because they wanted to or they were forced to by forces beyond their control, began to truly realize the predicament that they were in. Water was everywhere, and only continued to rise as water poured through the broken levees. New Orleans was stranded, with residents climbing onto rooftops, hoping that relief would come fast. Residents were at the mercy of the dangerous floodwaters, with limited supplies that they had when preparing for the storm, alongside supplies given to shelters by FEMA and local agencies, and the sweltering summer heat that plagued the New Orleans area. Local agencies, such as the New Orleans Fire and Police Departments, were submerged underwater, and communications were completely down in New Orleans, meaning that even contacting local officials was nearly impossible. But the biggest problem came down to the lack of a plan of what to do in a situation like this. Of course, the worst case scenario was that the levee system would collapse in New Orleans. But according to former FEMA Director Michael Brown, who was the director of FEMA during Katrina, testified to Congress that regarding that when it came to the response to the disaster in New Orleans due to Katrina, there was no plan. The fault of Hurricane Katrina's disastrous response from the government cannot be solely put on a singular part of the United States government, but rather, the disaster was caused by failures on all levels of the government. As conditions became suitable for search and rescue, the United States Coast Guard rushed towards New Orleans to begin rescue efforts. Outside of Camp Shelby, a day before Katrina made landfall, Joint Task Force Katrina was established, acting as an on-scene response to the destruction caused due to Katrina. Over 50,000 national troop personnel, with troops coming from all 50 states, came in to help with the relief efforts. All of these efforts were taken to undergo the largest search and rescue mission in the United States due to a natural disaster in U.S. history. The day after Katrina's landfall, looting and violence began in New Orleans due to limited supply of resources. People were fighting to stay alive. Search and rescue operations were halted, as now local officials had to focus on stopping the violence. The biggest priority was to establish order so that rescue operations could continue as normal. By the end of the day, 80% of New Orleans would be underwater. That evening, Governor Blanco ordered the complete evacuation of the Superdome, which is surrounded by water and sustained severe damage during Katrina. The same day, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff, declared that the federal government would take over all operations regarding the recovery efforts after Katrina, citing the National Response Plan. The local and state governments, and even the federal government, due to a lack of proper planning and communication, led to a horrific response that was observed in the aftermath of Katrina.
Great ideas can come from anywhere. With Wix, you decide where they go. Put your ideas into play with AI and watch them shape every aspect of your website. Explore as many layouts and designs as you want. Then zoom in and dictate the mood and vibe. And when it all comes together, launch your idea into the world where it belongs. It's your business, your website. You do it yourself on Wix.
However, Governor Blanco resisted, stating that the National Guard of Louisiana could handle the situation on their own. They could not. Blanco's resistance led to further delays in the recovery effort in New Orleans. Due to the sheer scope of the situation at hand, it would take multiple days to evacuate the entirety of New Orleans and the areas that desperately needed assistance. And yet, images of people stranded on rooftops plagued the news, and it quickly became obvious that everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. Fighting between Governor Blanco and the federal government only exacerbated issues, as Blanco and her staff were incapable of organizing a coherent state effort. There was nobody truly in control until the White House stood in and assumed control of the situation. The week following Katrina's landfall could only be described as a week of hell. Days passed by as the search and rescue missions continued. Supplies were dwindling, and water was not expected to recede until weeks after Katrina dissipated. Due to the sheer scale of the devastation in New Orleans, the relief that was provided was too much for any single governmental agency to handle. Agencies like FEMA were able to get relief to some locals, but many were left in the dark, stranded, abandoned by the system that was supposed to be there to help them get back to where they were before Katrina. FEMA as an agency was already in shambles after being combined with other agencies to form the Department of Homeland Security in 2002. But after Katrina, scrutiny against FEMA led to Congress taking measures to make sure that what happened after Hurricane Katrina, specifically in regards to how FEMA as an agency worked, never happened again. But as we all know, that really hasn't worked as shown by Hurricane Maria, but that's a different story for a different time. Assistance came in from other states, nonprofits such as the Red Cross, and internationally. But the support they gave, no matter how much they wanted to give, was too little given the devastation in front of them. The lack of planning and communications between all levels of government led to the deaths of hundreds. The flooding caused in New Orleans due to the failure of the levee system caused 2/3 of the flooding deaths in the city. Bodies were floating on the floodwaters, and even when the water cleared, the decomposing bodies of hundreds of residents littered the streets of New Orleans. The scope of the damage in Louisiana was beyond comprehension. Houses were completely ruined, covered in mold, and suffered losses that were beyond repair. The flooding caused by the failure of the levee system led to numerous residents with nothing, with areas being abandoned completely due to the damage left behind from Katrina. The economic impacts were devastating, as now New Orleans ports were inoperable, and 30 oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Gulf states were destroyed or damaged, leading to gasoline being scarce in portions of the country. The effects on the economy were beyond belief, with the total economic impact in Louisiana and Mississippi due to Katrina initially estimated to be over $100 billion. Across its path of destruction from Florida through the Gulf Coast and beyond, Hurricane Katrina was responsible for the deaths of approximately 1,833 people. Katrina became one of the deadliest hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin. Katrina caused $125 billion in damages, making it tied with Hurricane Harvey as the costliest hurricane ever recorded in the Atlantic Basin and in the world.
If you or someone you know hates ads with a burning passion, Pi is here to help. This is Pi. It's a free browser extension that blocks ads on your favorite sites. You just install it once, and then like that, you can enjoy internet without ads. That means no more of those pesky pop-ups or those annoying ads that play like right before your video, kind of like the one you're watching right now. Plus, if you opt in to see some ads, you can earn rewards on them. Like, who doesn't want that? Pi has over 10,000 5-star reviews and over 2 million users, and you're still out here watching ads like it's 2024. So download Pi today and you can thank me later.
In 2006, to absolutely nobody's surprise, the name Katrina was retired by the World Meteorological Organization and replaced with the name Katia. Hurricane Katrina is considered to be one of, if not the most infamous hurricane in United States history, and for good reason. Hurricane Katrina's reputation for what it did in New Orleans, the Mississippi Gulf Coast, alongside the localized flooding it caused and the horrendous response to the aftermath from all levels of government, gives Hurricane Katrina the reputation it has today. And yet, even though nearly 20 years have passed since Katrina, the scars still remain, both for those who survived and the nation as a whole. Anytime a hurricane seems to take an aim at New Orleans, people are immediately concerned about the levee system, and for good reason. The deaths of over 1,000 Americans occurred due to poor communication and a lack of preparedness of what to do ahead and after the storm. But I want to make it clear that the failed response to Katrina was not the fault of one singular agency, but rather the failure of all levels of government from nearly all agencies involved. Very few agencies got the storm right, either in the general response to the storm or in forecasting. The United States military, specifically the US Coast Guard, which, to be fair, does well in the aftermath of pretty much any natural disaster, and NOAA. While the forecast before the storm rapidly intensified was incorrect, when the forecast was shifted to the west, the forecast verified with the track of the storm. The messaging from the National Weather Service was clear of what was possible and was adequate. Hurricane Katrina, as a storm, is one that should never be forgotten. As the absolute worst-case scenario, everything would change, with scars etched into the coasts of Mississippi and Louisiana that last to this day. In late August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina brought its wrath to the Florida Peninsula and to the Gulf Coasts of Mississippi and Louisiana, with Louisiana, specifically New Orleans, suffering the worst of the storm. Hurricane Katrina's toll on the coasts of Mississippi and Louisiana was beyond comprehension, with nothing but pure devastation observed in Mississippi, but New Orleans, to put it lightly, saw the absolute worst of the damage. The levee system in New Orleans failed, leading to 80% of the city being submerged underwater. The government response to Katrina after the fact is considered to be the worst government response to a natural disaster in US history. Hurricane Katrina has garnered a reputation for being the most infamous hurricane in US history, and it's obvious as to why. I mean, it's far and away the most expensive hurricane in US history, tied with Hurricane Harvey of 2017. Everybody knows about Hurricane Katrina and are already aware of what I just told you. But today, I want to look deeper into Hurricane Katrina, looking deeper into how the meteorological development of Hurricane Katrina occurred, and how the response failed. So today, I will be taking a deep dive into Hurricane Katrina, going over the state of the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season thus far, the origins, the forecast, the preparations taken, the storm's impacts on the areas it traveled across, the aftermath and a failed response to Hurricane Katrina from the government, and the legacy that the storm has. Welcome to Nature's Fury. The 2005 Atlantic hurricane season was already extremely active by the time Katrina formed. To be fair, the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season would end up going down as the most active year for tropical cyclones in the northern Atlantic until 2020, at least in terms of named storms. Before Katrina formed, there were 10 named storms plus one unnamed depression that formed in the Atlantic basin, 2 of those being major hurricanes. The first major hurricane of the season was Hurricane Dennis, a high-end Category 4 hurricane that slammed into Cuba and the Gulf Coast of the United States. While Dennis did weaken before its landfall in the United States, Hurricane Dennis's impacts to Cuba and the United States led the storm to be retired. The second major storm was Hurricane Emily, the earliest Category 5 hurricane during the calendar year in the Atlantic Basin, peaking in the Caribbean Sea before making landfall on the Yucatan Peninsula as a Category 4 hurricane. The hurricane emerged off the coast of Mexico and made a second landfall as a Category 3 hurricane near San Fernando, Mexico. To this day, Hurricane Emily remains one of very few Category 5 hurricanes to not have its name retired. From then on, the Atlantic Ocean continued to churn out tropical cyclones, but none were major. But of course, coming into mid to late August, another tropical system would begin to organize off the coast of Florida, and would be given a name that would go down in infamy. But real quick, only a small portion of the people who like these weather documentaries are subscribed to the channel. So if you enjoy the content I create, consider subscribing. It helps support what I do and tells me I'm doing something right. Also, I have a Discord server that I frequently talk in, link to that is in the description. Anyways, back to Hurricane Katrina. Katrina's origins as a tropical system were more complex than most tropical cyclones that form in the northern Atlantic. Katrina's formation was the result of the interactions of a tropical wave, the mid-level remnants of Tropical Depression 10, and an upper-level trough. On August 11th, a tropical wave exited the coast of Africa and moved through the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean over the next few days. While the wave was crossing across the MDR, on August 14th, a strong upper-level trough located across the western Atlantic and the Bahamas created strong westerly shear across Tropical Depression 10, causing it to dissipate. The low-level circulation, however, persisted, moving westward while gradually weakening before dissipating near Cuba on August 21st. The mid-level circulation that originated from Tropical Depression 10 lagged behind the low-level circulation. Eventually, the mid-level circulation merged with the tropical wave that left the coast of Africa. The wave proceeded to produce a large area of showers and thunderstorms north of Puerto Rico, moving towards the northwest before consolidating east of the Turks and Caicos Islands. At the same time, the upper-level trough began to weaken as it moved westward into Florida, allowing for the tropical wave to develop due to the lack of wind shear associated with the trough. By 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on August 23rd, the system was designated as Tropical Depression 12. During the overnight hours, the depression became better organized, and at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on August 24th, the depression was upgraded to a tropical storm and given the name Katrina. As Katrina developed off the coast of Florida, Katrina came under the influence of a strengthening mid to upper level ridge over the northern Gulf of Mexico and southern United States. This ridge would be responsible for turning Katrina westward, and that was represented well in the forecasts. The National Hurricane Center predicted that Katrina would move over the southern Florida peninsula at a slow pace, projected to make landfall as a Category 1 hurricane and cross over into the Gulf of Mexico.
Style and substance in the GMC Sierra. Or get 0.9% APR on these Sierra models.
As to what was expected
All right, let's go. I'll accompany you there. Are you ready to see her again?
Yeah. Been ready.
I set up these shortcuts. Nice. Don't tell your sisters. I should have borrowed her from the Expedition Academy. Wish I had them. Come on, Gustav, speed up a bit. Sophie will have already gamaged by the time you've arrived.
My head.
Can't believe Sophie already turned 33. She looks so much younger than you.
Thanks.
She's popular. I'm sure she already has a necklace full of flowers.
What?
You look tense.
Yeah.
I know what you need.
No.
Come on, it'll loosen you up. And if you win, I'll...
All right. You're...
Yes!
For those who come after.
You won. Now, don't you feel better? I see your smile. All right, now, let's go find Sophie. I saw her near the...
Yeah.
Oh, the plaza is lively. Why people like to celebrate the gommage is still a mystery to me, but... Oh well. The red and white tree. I've always found it beautiful. I don't really understand. You and Sophie broke up so long ago. But clearly you never got over her. Why'd you wait until today to say something? Sophie's down there.
Yeah. Thanks.
It's a bit late, isn't it?
The last few days meant everything.
Can we talk?
sister. I love you all.
That's for your, if there's room.
There's always room.
You know,
I
I'm
miss you.
sorry that... I
You
miss
don't
you.
need to... Okay.
You go.
No, you.
You know how I feel? I wish things had been... You know, I often think... Another path, you know, another future.
Still can't finish your sentences, can you?
Yep, that hasn't changed.
I missed that. I never faulted you for wanting to believe. You're fighting to change things. I understand, just... in a different world, right?
We'll break the cycle, so she can't steal anyone else's future.
Stubborn people change the world. And you are the most stubborn person I know. Thank you. Walk me to the harbor?
Yes.
Oh, hi, Sir Gustav really... I knew he would. Yeah. Sophie, looks like you still have... Well, there are less and less people to buy them. I just wish you didn't have to work.
Tiffany.
I should finish cleaning up here and join everyone. See you.
See you.
I can't imagine what you're going through.
I'm fine. I'm fine. I've lived 33 good years. Look around. We've had our whole lives to prepare. We're all fine. Mostly.
I'm not fine.
You will be.
Oh, Marie. Your flowers? I didn't know about. And yet you didn't have children.
I'm not having this conversation. Not today.
Do you care so little about the future of Lumiere?
I'm not selfish enough to bring others into our... I know we are not many to think like this now, and it destroyed my relationship. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to... And you should cherish this moment with...
Sorry. See you at the harp.
Good luck.
Hey, you. You seem like a woman. I just finished my sculpture. This may be my life's finest work. How could I make it better? Perhaps paint it. Brilliant. I knew you were the right person.
You're most welcome.
I shall get to work. I see you're wearing... What's your name?
Sophie.
Sophie.
Oh, you...
But I will.
My gestural costume is the best. Hey, madame.
Of course,
that's what I think too. One day, even if it means joining, I'll raise a gestural army and we'll and me and my little brother will live with the We're tired of if the legends are true. They read. That's why I'm training every day.
That's... yeah.
Thanks.
Something wrong?
The expeditions. All they do is leave us here to...
You know their goal is to save us.
Yes, that's what my father told me before he left for expedition. And here we are again. We could have spent one more year together instead of wasting it away.
Your father fought to offer you...
I have no future. I know it.
You never know. This expedition, there are some...
yeah.
Gustav, why don't you show her some of your fighting skills to prove her wrong?
For those who come after.
That's... They all train their picto skills very hard to save us all.
Then, Madame...
Me? I'm content with my life. Or maybe...
Do you think...
My friend Ciel always says...
I don't want to have...
When the time comes, you'll make...
Thank you. Give this to your boyfriend. My father gave it to me.
When the time comes, you'll make the right...
Thank you.
Why does Manon keep saying...
You haven't heard that?
No.
Unofficial expedition motto. You never heard Lucien say it either. It's one of his favorites.
I think he prefers, we're already dead, you're just catching up.
Yeah, I heard that one recently.
I don't know. Kinda nice in a way. Having a deadline forces you to prioritize. It's a bit freeing as we get closer to the end.
You can really find the silver lining in everything, can't you?
No, it's just... things don't always work out the way we want. No use getting upset, you know? I don't know.
Hi, Gustav. You're back.
No, the one you suggested.
Oh, I'm glad. These garlands are all... I have a garland saved for you, too. But it's not a fail. Good luck.
Thanks.
Luna's playing. You two would make a cute couple.
If you say so.
Or maybe something already happened, huh?
You really think you're doing something?
Maxine.
None of you ever come back. You go and you take our resources.
You should go home. Where's your daughter?
Where do you think? Mourning her mother.
Then maybe you should be...
I can't look at her. She's just another reminder that nothing we do matters. Nothing. We hope and we persevere, and still they die.
That's why we're going. We can save them. With our Lumina tech.
The paintress? What? What's a scrawny shit like you gonna do to the paint?
Maxime.
Forget it. Bon. This lady...
In love?
Not quite. My inspiration has been... Nobody buys paintings anymore.
You all can...
I need inspiration. But you...
We broke up.
That is of no consequence. But it is this passion. I know. I am also the official... Will you help me? Fantastic.
Okay, I guess.
Come on, dodge your lady's beautiful moves. Come on, dodge your lady's beautiful moves. That was splendid. One more time. Come on, dodge your lady's beautiful moves. Come on, dodge your lady's beautiful moves. Sublime. One last time. That was I was so enthralled that I completed the...
It's nice. Thank you.
It is I who should... I will propose it for the new opera paint.
I feel it...
Love will also take this as a gesture of appreciation. I see your...
Sometimes I feel sorry for her.
Who? The paintress?
Look at her. She looks sad. Maybe she's a prisoner too. Stuck in the same cycle with us. Silly, huh?
Only you could... Use empathy at a moment like this.
It's one of the few choices I can make.
I couldn't do it.
It's okay. You don't have to.
You'd have to be crazy to use pictos on your own body.
Why? Aren't you enjoying...
Nah, the show's great, but etching chroma onto your skin. Oh, that's brutal. I'll stick to painting pictos on my machines.
Could be useful, though. The expeditions rely on...
Yeah, they're crazy too.
I've always loved the harbour. I see you're apprentices.
Oh.
Gustav!
What?
Here, Sophie asked us to bring you your coat.
We sewed up the sleeves so you don't have to keep rolling it up.
You guys know how to sew?
Sophie helped us. Turns out it's not that hard. You really should have done this ages ago.
You did this?
Gentlemen, that was supposed to be between us, yeah? I wanted to do something for you.
Soph. Thanks, guys. This is great. Thank you.
See you at the festival?
Don't leave without saying goodbye.
Yeah, of course not. What? I know that face.
You mean a lot to them. I can tell.
Yeah, they mean a lot to me too. Legacy can take many forms, right?
Yeah.
You told me that.
Right.
Why?
I wanted to see you wearing it.
Oh, you like uniforms now?
This too is your legacy.
In a way. It's yours too.
Esti tornere marina, esti linaki soledad, dona l'ora tovla, alina. Ista surano taki lera
I'm here.
There you are. You can't hide from us, you know. Like I said, mourning's best done with friends.
Lucian,
What? It is. Grieving alone's the worst.
where's mine?
Santé, les amis.
Santé!
Yeah, no, I could use a drink.
Five tables this year. You see that? Told you we'd beat the 34s. Even Maëlle showed up, and she hates these things. Wanna go take a look?
I don't... maybe later. I'll catch up. I'm okay. I'm okay. You go.
Yeah. Time for a refill anyway.
There's an excess of wine, again. Thank your sister for her generosity.
Oh, and try to enjoy yourself. Don't drink alone, you weirdo.
Yeah, right. Enjoy myself. Let's at least check on Maëlle and my apprentices.
Hey, Gustav. Check out the new Pictos.
Looks a bit rough.
I've been working on this for months. It's my...
Your personal masterpiece.
It's dead useful. Trust me.
Sure. Why?
Great.
Not a chance.
Your loss.
Hey, Amandine.
Oh, hey, handsome. Perfect timing. I'm
Certainly important.
on it. Just...
Nah, I'm good.
Hello there, Gustav. Perhaps what
Colette, you've been holding out?
relics from before the fracture, passed down through the generations.
That's kind of you.
I may not be able to join the expedition.
Ah. I need to think about it.
Glass of wine?
Keep your sweat.
Bring Gustav a...
Who exactly are you talking to? They cut servers from the...
Ah, the ultimate indignity. A farewell party where we serve ourselves.
I'm betting you've got another bottle stacked.
You wound me. But yes, in fact, I do have a bottle. Always be or was it? Always bring back.
Right.
And I am prepared. Prepared. Hey. We've got your Lumina converter, yeah?
Yeah, well, we've only tested it here.
Don't worry, buddy.
Great. Hey.
Hey, yourself? You okay?
Yeah. Actually,
That's okay.
what about you?
Oh, that was...
Oh, sorry. I really thought you guys would work.
It's for the best. I need full focus on the expedition. And our...
Yeah. We're all... You came.
I wasn't sure if I should.
You've been avoiding us.
I heard Seba filled my...
Yeah.
Do you think I'm a coward?
Do you?
Not anymore. Not all of us can change the world.
Meaning what?
More like... rediscover.